And our first case today I'm real excited about. It's from the VP of Marketing Analytics, Ari Sheinkin. He's going to be here in a minute, but he has a team of 5,000 marketers that he has to wrangle together and get headed in the one direction. You guys thought your situations were challenging, right? And so he's going to walk us through. He has, based on some of the things that he's learned over the years, he has 7 truths about how to leverage data to more effectively communicate and engage your customers. And so what we have here, obviously we're not going to have time to go over all the 7 truths, but we've tried to distill this session as much as possible. Ari and I are going to be talking about the truths, and so let me just give you a heads up right now. This is going to be a jam-packed session. I would encourage you to go and get your note stuff ready because there's going to be a lot of stuff coming your way. We erred on the side of jamming this full of valuable content. So. But without further ado, help me welcome Ari to the stage. Come on, Ari. Hey. All right, let's have a seat. Let's get started. So, Ari, as we just jump into this, obviously many of us are familiar with IBM, but help me give us a sense for your role, what you do, and kind of who you are in that organization.
Sure. Well, first, thanks everyone for attending. So, as you said, IBM's got between 5,000 and 6,000 marketing/communication professionals. We have about 250 to 300 analytics folks who report to me. So our job is to make analytics part of every decision we make. That's the biggest challenge of the job. It's not actually the data work. It's not really at the core the analytics work. It's the organizational change side, which is a lot about what the conversation will have.
Yeah, and so obviously with 5,000 marketers, you have a lot going on. Can you give the audience just a sense of the different spaces, the different industries, the different places that these marketers are kind of engaging customers?
Sure. So you get a sense. IBM overall has about 400,000 employees. So if you just think about that, that's the size of Miami.
Wow.
But give that some thought. So when you have to change, it can be challenging. We're in 17 different industries, banking and government and healthcare and automotive and electronics. Yep. You can buy from IBM with a swipe of a credit card and API that costs a couple cents. You can, in probably 10 seconds, you can spend 3 years negotiating with IBM a $1 billion outsourcing deal. So our marketing covers 170 actually countries, 17 industries, services, hardware, software, $10 billion.
Good. And as we've talked about it prior to this moment, you had a pretty decent challenge trying to bring a data mindset into this organization, into your team. So can you just walk us, I know we have it in the slide, but can you just walk us through some of the challenges that you were facing in that moment?
Yeah. So IBM, like a lot of B2B companies, I don't know if any of you come from more of a B2B background, but very traditional marketing, which means it's a sales support function. IBM for 105 years was a sales organization. We have 50,000 salespeople, not including our consultants, and they're out there to go sell. And marketing was there to set up events, to create collateral, to enable them to do their job. But that doesn't work in a digital world, because you can even see some of the stats that we shared. We were finding internally, our clients, by the time we see them, our prospects, they're most of the way through the journey. The idea that we're going to initiate a conversation with them and say, well, if you want to see Watson Analytics, you can schedule a time and come to the office. That worked for 105 years. It doesn't work in a digital world. So the customer's in charge, the customer's expectations about personalization and relevance, about timeliness, a dramatic change of not just being data-driven, but digital first and client-centric.
Good. One of the things that I really valued in our previous conversations, I'd like you to tease this out a little bit, is you mentioned that everyone now is speaking about data and the importance of it. I mean, you guys all showed up here to the session probably because in some sense you know the value of data. But there was this distinction you made between an organization that is data in word versus being data in practice.
Right.
And my guess is the organization probably prior to the things we're going to show the audience that you did and you taught, but you would say IBM would speak of data. They were data in word, but they weren't quite yet data in practice. Can you just tease out that idea and what you meant by that?
Yeah. There were 2 parts to it when we were talking about it. Being data-driven and being client-centric. So every company I meet with says they're client-centric, and every company I meet with wants to be data-driven. But if you want to know if you're client-centric,
Yes.
one of the things I learned over my years of doing this with lots of companies is look at your data. If your data is not organized around a people, then you're not, by definition, going to be client-centric, nor are you going to be data-driven. So IBM never had a lack of marketing data. We had enormous amounts of marketing data. What we didn't have, though, was an orientation around the individual person. When Ginny Rometty took over her job, she's our CEO, she made this statement that seems obvious, probably to everyone in the room, but to us it was kind of profound when she said, we don't sell to accounts, we sell to people. It doesn't matter that we're this enormous company. At the end of that transaction is another human being. Do we know them?
Yep.
Do we understand them? Do we appreciate their values? Do we know their context? If you don't know that stuff, if your data is in silos by organization, or if it's around accounts like it was for us, you're not data-driven and you're not client-centric. That's where we started.
That's excellent. And so you saw these challenges. You wanted to make the shift from being data-driven inward versus actually in practice. You wanted to be actually practicing data-driven, what you were saying. What did you do? How did you go about because this is a story of changing a big organization, changing the way things are done. So how did you start doing that? We have
a very strong analytics team. So that's the advantage. And the nature of being IBM, not surprising, we're good with data and analytics. So we understood lots of things. And I was in a meeting, I was probably about a year into the job, it's about 2014, when someone said to me, you come to these meetings and there are things that you know that we as marketers don't know. So how is it you know that stuff? And it's because I have a team of data scientists. I have 250 people who help me understand these things. And the woman who was a vice president in marketing said, what you really should do is just come and, can you consolidate it down and just tell us the 5 truths that we need to know? I said, oh, that's a pretty good idea. So we came with this idea of the 7 truths. It grew a little bit. The idea of the 7 truths is it is actually underneath it. It is a very data-intensive exercise. It's a lot of understanding that comes from modeling and analytics and testing and experimentation. But you're not going to take that out to the average marketer.
Right.
So we had to put it in a format that was easy to consume. Instead of being scary, it was exciting. The picture actually on the board, I did this with some business partners last year, which are not the easiest group to get excited about data-driven marketing. But you can see right behind me there's a basketball hoop. We turned this into a game show. So as we did this, I've probably done this 50 times around the world with our marketers. 2 hours based on the Price is Right, 7 games that impart these 7 truths in a way that's tangible and you feel it, and you never have to get necessarily into the depth of the model, but the truth of the insight becomes evident to you.
That's good. Now I'm going to show the slide of the 7 truths. Now I know that, how long did you, when you taught this, about how long would you spend teaching these 7 truths?
We spent about 2 hours in the face-to-face course, and we have a lot of other material.
Yeah, and so obviously we're not going to be here 2 hours going through each of these 7 truths. So as Ari and I were talking about, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a few of those. But before we do that, would you be able to just provide a quick high-level overview of kind of the 7 truths, and not only teach them, but just kind of explain, because these are just one words, like explain what each of these words meant.
And some of these, I would say, were specific to IBM. When you get to something like gating strategy, we have almost a religious debate in the company about what content goes behind a registration form and when not to.
Yeah, no one can relate to that, right? Yeah. Can't relate to that at all.
Maybe other people have that problem. I thought that was that. A lot of these are also kind of common sense that we just had to quantify and put force behind. So we'll talk a little bit about targeting and offers, but something like discovery. As simple as the language we use. Right now, and I know there's an IBM booth out here, I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about, but IBM will market cognitive. Cognitive, you'll see that in our advertising right now, because we have a point of view that I won't go into that cognitive is different than AI. But guess what people are actually searching on? They're searching on AI. And at some point you have to recognize you don't get to decide. Discovery is not for you to decide. We're so used to being in charge, we had to let that go. What we found about the 7 truths was it wasn't just that they were 7 important things. We empirically found that when our teams did these 7 things, not one of them, because you could do 1 or 2 of them, you had to do all 7 of them, that what we were really seeing was a correlation and a causal effect with revenue. So that was very important too, that this was not an abstraction, this was a simplified way of taking all our modeling and saying this is how you get to revenue.
That's good. That's good. I want to focus on the notion of targeting for a minute. So that's obviously your first truth. That says something about what you think about targeting, and it's important. So let me just ask you this. Why targeting first? What was it that you thought was important about targeting that you led with that in these trainings?
I still think, and I spent a lot of time deep into data and a lot of time working with technology like Watson and everything that's possible in the world today, it still all comes back to, in marketing, do you understand the person you're interacting with? And so if you're not thinking about your audience, if you're not effective with your targeting, nothing else we do downstream works.
Yeah, that's good. One of the things, and he mentioned it earlier about his training, is he would have these strategically seated questions for his group. And so we figured we'd just pose this question to you. So, in 2014, IBM increased their marketing emails by 37%, which led to, and you can read the responses there. I'd like to get your thoughts on which do you think was the result of the increased marketing emails. Any thoughts? All right, we'll do this. We'll just vote by hand here. So if you think A, one finger, B, two fingers, C, three fingers, and D, four. Let's vote. What do you think? Okay, I'm looking around the room. Okay. Oh, interesting mix here. Are you going to walk through what the actual results were of that increase in emails?
So just the context very quickly, 2014, we're getting a decreasing response rate from email. So what do you do when you're seeing lower response rate to email? You send more email. What happens when you send more email? Some of you get it. You get less response. Not just absolutely less response, but you actually drive the response rates down. And it just comes back to that basic principle that we didn't understand the people we were interacting with. This was a shotgun approach to marketing that just didn't have value for the person on the other side of it.
Yeah, so walk us through, so that was an excellent setup for the problem. Walk us through kind of how you were beginning to leverage data to try to get more effective at communicating, targeting, and reaching the right people.
So part of the message was just this notion again of you're not in control anymore. So you're going to respond to a trigger that's initiated by your prospect. Do you understand who that person is? Do you understand their role in the company? Do you understand how they make decisions, especially for the things we sell, which tend to be larger deals with more stakeholders? Do you understand how the stakeholders work together to make decisions? Do you understand where they go for information, how they make language? If you don't understand that stuff, you are not ready to engage with them by email, by web, by mobile, by any channel. So we put a lot of structure and we have some technology around this to help teams, but we really had to get them just in this mindset. That was the first challenge.
That's good. And so these are kind of the three questions that you laid out for your marketers to think through before they send out another email.
Before they do anything else.
The solution isn't just keep swinging the axe hard, actually think through it, and that's good. Now, what's interesting is sometimes the data isn't very popular, or it's something that can be, it's not intuitive. And so I think this next chart speaks to that in some sense. So explain what we're seeing here.
Yeah, this is a fun one. So we have a database of response rates by role. We can cut things by industry. We have a lot of data, like I said before. Right. Every marketing group I meet with in IBM, when you ask them who their target audience is, will start by saying something with a C. I'm going after the CMO. I'm going after the CISO. I'm going after the CEO. And you'll say to them things like, there aren't that many of them in the world. We bring data to the discussion now, and we're able to say to them, the people, this is actually from our security business, the people who actually respond to your marketing, most of them are in jobs like professional developer, IT, or social media specialist. These may not be the sexiest people in the company, these may not be the people with the highest titles, but these are the people who actually are responding and buying. Would you consider shifting the way you're thinking about targeting to go after the audience who actually wants to hear from you?
That's good. So I'm going to jump past this slide and go to offers. I want to make sure we get some time here with the audience. So one of the things that was in your presentation that you walked through with your team was this idea of leveraging data to more effectively curate the content you're serving to your audience. Can you explain a little bit like what you were seeing there and what you were kind of teaching your team?
What we were seeing is something in the neighborhood, I'll be actually more than neighborhood, 98.4% of our content wasn't hitting the threshold we'd set for it, 98.4. That's pretty close to everything. So we were not being effective with content.
Right.
We had this experience that the way I would describe it to teams is if you go in to buy a car, there's a progression to the conversation like we heard in the main conference. You want to read the brochure, you come into the dealer, you look at the car, you sit in it, you go for a test drive, you talk financing, eventually buy. IBM, we were finding that we're falling into traps where either we just kept wanting to talk about the car. Someone said, no, I get it, I want to drive it. You don't want to drive it yet. I have more brochures for you. Sometimes we're over-educating,
Yes.
and other times someone was walking the dealership and we were saying, well, here's the finance papers.
Yeah.
You don't want to drive it.
And why was that happening?
It was happening because we weren't thinking about the client's progression
Got it.
through their journey. Now, wherever they happen to be in the moment, where we're able to meet them at that moment, they're going to decide where they are, and we'll be ready to interact with them.
Yeah. Explain the results of this. We won't vote on it, but explain the results of this question.
So just looking at content types, we were building a lot of what we call discover learn content, early stage engagement, things like white papers and ebooks and videos. And we started to make the distinction between these early stage discover learn and what we call try buy offers. And what we like to do is anchor campaigns around the try buy experience, and then everything else gets built out around that.
So you found that the demo was the most effective.
Demo's an example. There are more effective things than demos, which I think we can talk about, but
Absolutely.
Demo is an example of a more effective.
That's good. That's good. And I think you were beginning to talk about this overall customer experience and mapping the content
Right.
based on that. Can you, because this I think is a really good slide for all of us to think about in terms of not just shooting out content kind of willy-nilly, but thinking about the stages the customer is in and matching the content to those stages.
This is what we spent a lot of work on. That in that early discover learn, what we found empirically is very important. Not at this point, you're not engaged in a brand conversation. You're not talking about IBM. What you're trying to do in that early stage is set the criteria of evaluation. So the example I use with teams is often water. That if I'm trying to sell water at this point, I'm not talking about Poland Spring or Dasani. If I'm Poland Spring, I'm talking about purity, right? Because that's the criteria that I want to evaluate. When we get to that try-buy stage, we found that there are 3 characteristics that make try-buy offers effective. Number 1, they're experiential. We talk about this sometimes as lean-forward experiences instead of lean-back. So trials for software being the best example. Number 2, they have a reason to act now, which is not a new idea to marketers, but so much of our content was just sitting there waiting. And the third is what we call fair exchange of value, which is people don't want to give you their information for white paper, more often than not. So what are they willing to exchange for because contact information or that next step has value to the consumer?
That's good. And I think, for you guys, this may not be your customer journey, it may be different, but I think the concept of using data and identifying where are these different pieces of content are going to be most strategically valuable. That's the main aha here, and I think it's something that Ari and his team did very effectively. And is this something that's going on today now, or is this something your teams are doing?
This is now part of our culture. So if you meet an IBMer, they'll talk about try-buy, and we'll try to build our journeys anchored on the try-buy experience and then work around that. What we found is between a 5 and a 50 times increase, times X, when you get that try-buy experience right versus trying to cram a white paper into that experience or a video and think that that's where you're going to get the conversion.
That's excellent. Excellent. Final thing, one of the points that I'd like you to walk through is this idea of every interaction is relevant and drives the next action. And I believe there was one particular bit of data that your team saw that you used to kind of illustrate this idea. Can you walk us through that? I think I have it. Yep, should be able to see it on the screen right now.
This reiterates what I was saying before, which is that, first of all, that incentive, which we don't use often enough in our work still, but that reason to act now. So now you're not necessarily going to be a showmercial and say you get 3 extra knives thrown in, but even for the things we sell, there's a reason to make the decision today if you're ready to make the decisions. If you're not, we have other experiences that make sense for you. If you're ready to try today, then we have something that's experiential for you. And by the way, if you're in that learn stage, we have learning. But in terms of getting this conversion, it's the incentives, it's the software, it's the webinars. Those are the things that convert people in that moment that we're trying to get to.
That's great. So what I hear from him, what I think was powerful is every step, every little thing that you're asking your customer to do, some sort of reason, some sort of justification, some sort of value, the smallest step.
That's right.
Needs some sort of potential value.
There was an example.
That's great.
That was reminded of. We had a lot of white papers. And one of our analysts pointed out that the only next step that was embedded in the white paper, if you flip through the white paper, the only thing next was on the very back, it said, please recycle. Right? It has to link to what you want to have happen next. And when we think now about marketing, if I were to show you some of the diagrams, there's almost an engineering mindset.
We're thinking, what's the next step?
That's right.
And we need to make sure, it's so funny how often we do that, right? We assume the customer is going to make the connection of, okay, this is the step I need to take. And so, so that's great. Let's talk the web experience. That was another point in your presentation, the web experience. Explain some of the data things that you were doing around the web experience to make it more effective for the audience. I know you ran some tests.
Yeah, that's the number one thing. It is an example of a test, but the number one thing, and we talked about it a lot this morning, we are trying to build a culture of experimentation. My point of view, having done analytics for a long time, is there are absolutely best practices around web design, but there's nothing that's more powerful than testing, especially in the context of a company like ours, where the test that's going to work, the colors that work in Japan, the layout, the value, they're not the same thing that's going to work in the US. The placement of things in China are simply not the same. The number one thing we're trying to teach our marketers is become an experimenter, become a tester. Don't think there's a place to look up the answer. You now empowered, every marketer in IBM can run their own test. We have a platform that allows you in 10 seconds to run a test like this and come up with very odd and surprising answers.
Yep. And you begin to optimize your designs to meet the motivations, but I think one of the things that you, as we were talking, this idea of challenging the best practices, you guys ran some tests that kind of went in the face of some of the best practices that were out there.
Absolutely. And that has to do with industries and regions. But the number one thing is if you keep experimenting, especially if you do it in the context of a framework, you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
It's almost inevitable. But if you come from a traditional marketing background, you don't think of yourself as being a scientist. You don't think of yourself as being an experimenter. This is a test I remember from early on. This got a 1,500% increase. And when I was presenting this to the CMO, just as an example, he said, yeah, but really all you did was you made the image smaller and you put a red button and you made the call to action.
Yeah.
I said, yeah. We had PhDs, and that's what we figured out. It doesn't have to be complicated, it just has to work, 1,500%.
Yeah, that's great, that's great. So I would love for you to walk through, because you've done a lot of testing, you have a culture of testing, some of the high-level insights that you learned about your customer through some of those testing initiatives.
The number one thing I talk about in the testing environment is it really is about a conversation with your customer. If you think about a test as, I'm just testing this color, I'm just testing this language, you have this one-off interaction. But when you talk about, I'm listening to my customer, it's a whole new way of having a conversation with them. I don't need surveys, and I don't need focus groups. Then you start understanding your client, and you understand where they're engaging, and the purpose of that engagement. And old IBM page up on the board there, which I think anyone in this room could come up with a better version of. But that's where we were starting in 2014.
Yeah.
Hopefully if you go to IBM.com today, you'll see a different mindset, or you'll see a different kind of page, but it grew out of a different kind of mindset.
So this is great. I'd like you to just, at a high level, give us a sense of the impact this had. So you went around, you spoke to 5,000 marketers, you taught this material. What kind of impact are you seeing from the application of these principles?
So what we found is, this is more specific to...
I'll jump past it,
Yeah, if we skip probably two.
There we go.
Yeah, so you start seeing these really dramatic increases. You will see things like, and I always have to stop and say, it's not a 20% increase in our targeting results, it's a 20x increase, or I said before, 5 to 50 times. What's interesting though is you can be very effective in one of these truths and not get to revenue. That was the big revelation of this, which is it's not enough to have great targeting if you don't have a great experience. It's not great to have great experience in content if you don't have a great web design. It's not enough, we don't talk about response scoring and some of the things that happen downstream. They have to work together. Where teams are doing this, they're getting these results for things like targeting and offers and web experience. But more importantly, we're seeing a really significant increase in revenue from the teams who are able to take this approach to data-driven marketing.
That's good. We have 1 minute left. You had 7 principles.
Yes.
If you could go back in time and say something else, or something, now that you've kind of seen them implemented, you've kind of seen the impact, is there an 8th principle, an 8th truth that you might add to the equation?
I can't go back in time, but the thing that we've added on top of all this, which has made a very big difference, we have a new CMO in IBM, is marketing is about ROI. Marketing is about ROI. So when we were doing the 7 truths, there was a tendency to get stuck on one of the truths, that I've gotten better at web design, yay. I've gotten better at offers, yay. This is an example of something our CM uses, we call the marketing top sheet or the performance top sheet. If you are not driving more revenue, you're not an effective marketer. That's the ultimate truth. And then all the 7s are the ways in which you're going to be able to move these bubbles to the top and to the right and be more effective and more impactful. That's the one that we should have started with.
Yeah.
Luckily, we've come back around to it now.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Well, guys, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff here. I've spent quite a few hours with Ari just talking through his principles. He's got a lot of valuable information here. We tried to pull out the best ones for you. I knew we were running a little risky here by trying to put so much in the presentation, but we did want to give you guys value. What I do want to do, you're going to be around for a little bit?
We'll be around.
Yeah, so we're going to wrap this presentation. Ari's going to be around here, so if you have any questions about anything he said, you guys are welcome to come see him up here up front and ask him. But Ari, thank you for walking us through these principles and spending some time with us. Really appreciate it. Let's give him a hand.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.